Hello, and welcome to week 2 of English 121. This week you're going to watch this lecture about plot, and you're going to download the slides that correspond to this lecture. You're going to want to actively read our textbook Literature, Chapter 1, pages 14 through 25. That includes the short story A&P by John Updike. You're going to want to actively listen to The Lottery by Shirley Jackson from the New Yorker fiction podcast. Or you're going to want to actively read along in our textbook. That short story is found on pages 262 to 268. You also want to read Shirley Jackson on Writing. This is found on page 269. The week 2 conversation is on close reading The Lottery for plot, and our reflection will be on the short story A&P. So by the end of this week, you should feel comfortable identifying and critically analyzing the elements of plot in a short story. Great job this week, last week, for those of you who identified our 3 literary characters. Fiction was Flannery O'Connor, poetry was Amy Lowell, and drama was August Wilson. So in this class, whenever you're reading, you're expected to read actively. There's a checklist here, and in a few minutes I'm going to take you through how to do this checklist with the actual stories that we're reading this week. In the future, you'll be responsible for going through the checklist on your own, making sure you're really thinking about, before you read, who the author is, what genre it is, what the text is titled, when it was published, and then going through and circling passages, asking questions relating to the text as you're reading. So this week's reading focuses on the idea of plot in short fiction. Plot refers to the events that occur in a story and how these events are arranged artistically by the author. In a story, a dramatic situation is created when a character experiences some sort of conflict. How the parts of the story are arranged is part of the author's artistry. And tricks in plot include starting in the middle of things or in medias res, flashing back to a previous time, or dropping hints about what could happen in the future, which is called foreshadowing. There's many parts to a story. The first part of the story is always the exposition, and this is the opening portion where the scene is set and where the main characters are introduced, and sometimes some background information is given. The main character of a story, remember, is called a protagonist. Usually, the next part of the story is a crisis. Something happens to the main character of the story, and it creates a moment of high tension. Then there's a climax, the moment of greatest tension in the story, so this crisis has reached its climax. And then a conclusion, the resolution, or the denouement, and this is the ending or the resolution of the story. It's the untying of the knot. When you write about plot, you want to think about these things. What is the story's central conflict? So what is the big thing that's happened? Who is the protagonist, and what does he or she want? What is at stake for the protagonist in the conflict? What stands in the way of the protagonist easily achieving his or her goal? What are the main events that take place in the story? How does each event relate to the protagonist's struggle? Where do you find the story's climax or crisis? How is the conflict resolved? Does the protagonist succeed in achieving his or her goals? And what is the impact of success, failure, or a surprising outcome on the protagonist? So when you look at A&P closely and you do some active reading, we think about, who is John Updike? Do you know anything about him? So that's the author of this text. And what you do is you read the biography in our textbook, so you really know who he is based on, you always want to read those biographies found right before the short story. And then you can always Google the author's name to find out a little bit more about this author. What genre is the text? Usually this will be indicated in our text. In this case, A&P is a short story. When was it written? This one was written in 1961. If you see the top of the text in the book, it says 1961. What is the title of the text, and based on the title, what do you predict it will be about? So you want to think about the title. If you looked into it, you'd see that A&P, the title, is the name of a grocery store, not story. It's a chain of grocery stores. So you want to think about, okay, well, predict what that means, right? And then you want to use the active reading checklist see previous slide, to guide you in active reading. You must write in the text. I'm going to be checking this. If you rented your textbook, you're going to find a way to take notes on everything that we read. It's very important that you are interacting with your text. Now, while you're reading, so you've done the pre-reading, you've thought about the short story A and P. Now, while you're reading it, I want you to circle words that aren't familiar to you, and I want you to look them up in a dictionary. And try to use a college dictionary. Mark words or passages that make you think about things you've already read or personal experiences. Mark passages that you agree with or disagree with, and state why you agree or disagree with the passage. Mark difficult passages, and then go back to them later. Mark passages that you like and note why you like them. Mark parts of the text that highlight the main theme of the text. Summarize what's being said. By the end, you should know what happened in the short story. Ask questions. Ask yourself questions. Ask the author questions. Ask the characters in the text questions. And then identify any literary elements you see. And we will be learning a lot about literary elements throughout the semester. After you read, those of you who have access to your interactive textbook, you want to click on Watch the Video at the end of A&P in the e-text, that's page 14 at the bottom of the page, and watch the sections Reading and Interpreting. This will really help you understand this short story. The next story you're going to be reading this week is called The Lottery, and this is by Shirley Jackson. Then you're going to participate in a conversation about plot. Before you listen to it, you really want to think about who was Shirley Jackson. See the biography on 72 of the e-text, or pages 262 to 263 of the print text. Do you know anything about her? Think about it. Have you ever read anything by her? Have you heard of her? What genre is the text? It's fiction. Specifically, it's a short story. When was it written? In 1948. Look at the top of the story on page 262. Think about what had just happened in 1948. What large world event had just occurred and finished. That's important to the story. Where was it published? If you look at the bio, it tells you it was published in the New Yorker. What does the title of this text make you think about? And what does it make you think the text is about? So think about what a lottery is and what your definition of it is, and then see if that's exactly what it ended up being about. Then I want you to go through and do the same exact checklist while you're reading, the circling of the words, the asking questions. Go through all of these steps as you're reading the text. Doing this work will make it so much easier to write about the stories. It takes more time, but it's totally worth it. If any of you are having trouble doing active reading, please come see me during my office hours. Alright, so your first assignment, once you've done the active reading of those 2 short stories, please answer the following questions as part of your conversation. Remember, in your conversation, you'll need to post your own post, and then you'll also have to, your own post is due by Friday at 11:59 p.m., and then you'll need to respond to at least 3 of your peers' posts, and that is due by Monday, a week from today, on Monday, September 1st, I believe. Yes, September 1st. Sorry, my office is still in disarray from the earthquake, and I hope you all are okay, and I'm sorry that I didn't even mention that at the beginning of this lecture. So I know that we've all had a tough weekend, that's for sure. So when you're talking about the lottery, I want you to think about what is the main conflict of the story. Who's the protagonist and what's happening to him or her, right? What's the conflict? Who is the protagonist? What does he or she want? What is at stake for the protagonist in the conflict? So remember, the protagonist is the person that something is happening to in this story. So it should be obvious in the story who is receiving the action of the conflict. What stands in the way of the protagonist easily achieving his or her goal? What are the main events that take place in the story, and how does each event relate to the protagonist's struggle? Where do you find the story's climax or crisis, and how is the conflict resolved? Does the protagonist succeed in achieving his or her goals? What is the impact of success, failure, or surprising outcome on the protagonist? Read Writing Effectively, Shirley Jackson on Writing. When it was published originally, in the New Yorker, the lottery caused a sensation. Why do you think readers reacted so intensely to the story? How did you feel when you read the story? Can you understand why readers of the New Yorker felt so strongly about it? All right, after you complete your conversation, I'd also like you to write in your reflection journal, and you'll be thinking about the story A and P. Please answer the following questions. Notice how artfully Updike arranges details to set the story in a perfectly ordinary supermarket. What details stand out for you as particularly true to life? What does this close attention to detail, how does this close attention to detail contribute to the story? How fully does Updike draw the characters of Sammy? What traits, admirable or otherwise, does Sammy show? Is he any less a hero for wanting the girls to notice his heroism? To what extent is he more thoroughly and fully portrayed than the doctor in Godfather Death? What part of the story seems to be the exposition? See the definition of exposition in the discussion of plot earlier in the chapter. Of what value to the story is the carefully detailed portrait of Queenie, the leader of the three girls? As the story develops, do you detect any change in Sammy's feelings towards the girls? Where in A and P does the dramatic conflict become apparent? What moment in the story brings the crisis? What is the climax of the story? Why exactly does Sammy quit his job? Does anything lead you to expect Sammy to make some gesture of sympathy for the three girls? What incident earlier in the story, before Sammy quits, seems a foreshadowing? What do you understand from the conclusion of the story? What does Sammy mean when he acknowledges how hard the world was going to be hereafter? What comment does Updike, through Sammy, make on supermarket society? Alright guys, that's it for this week. Next week we're going to be moving on to think about point of view, okay? Please contact me if you have any questions. If not, I will see you online.